a terrifying home invasion in the dead of night, a family brutally murdered, and an innocent man hanged for the crime. All these tragic deaths would reveal the larger specter of horror that has haunted Ireland for centuries. Welcome back to another Irish edition of Historical Horror, a series in which I draw upon my two absolute favorite subjects to bring you the strangest, creepiest, darkest tales from our past. Today we're talking about the Maamtrasna murders and the execution of Miles Joyce. On the dark, moonless night of August 17, 1882, horror struck a family living in the rugged, remote hills of Maamtrasna, Galway. John Joyce, his wife Bridget, two of their children, Peggy and Michael, as well as John's mother, Mairead, were brutally murdered in their small stone cottage, variously shot and bludgeoned. There was no robbery, no clear motive, only senseless, bloody violence. The following morning, Joyce's cousins discovered the bodies and promptly alerted authorities. Based on the witness testimony of the Joyce cousins, 10 men from the community were arrested and charged with the home invasion and murders. Here's the problem. The 10 men arrested, all Irish speakers, and their trial conducted entirely in English. The accused did not understand a word of English, and their solicitor did not have a word of Irish. If you don't know anything about County Galway, it is in the Irish province of Connacht, which at the time was considered the wildest, most remote, most savage of the provinces. Connacht was also the province where a huge number of poor rural Irish were driven with encroaching English settlement and colonialism. Because of this, it's also the region where the Irish language never really died out. So in Connacht, you have a huge population of Irish speakers. With no way to properly defend themselves, unable to even comprehend the proceedings against them, these men were effectively silenced. The investigation itself was seriously shoddy, negligently executed, and way too hastily concluded by a law enforcement body that was under immense political pressure to make a show of force against the savage and unruly Irish. Remember, Ireland at the time was still under the shackles of English rule. The power dynamic was always toxic, but relations were particularly strained at the moment because just a few months before, the British Secretary of Ireland and his undersecretary had been murdered by Irish nationalists in Dublin. The investigation was shoddy. The trial itself was an abomination. Later, it would become clear that the entire case was built on perjured evidence. But even before this revelation came to light, there was significant public doubt and disquiet about the proceedings. Neither side could understand each other. The Crown's case was considered weak, and it was further undermined by whiffs of corruption and blatant bias. But with rising tensions between the English and the Irish in a justice and colonial system already under strain, law officials made it clear that they could not care less who hanged for the murder, so long as they could make an example out of some Irish patsy. This wasn't just a trial. This was colonial power in action. Centuries of English rule in Ireland had been devastating for the Irish. The penal laws, the Great Famine, the landlord system, all of it was designed to keep the Irish poor, powerless, voiceless in their own country. Maamtrasna trial was a grotesque showcase of that system at work. Contrary to the witness testimonies of the Joyce cousins, 6 of the men were found to have not participated, not even been present for the home invasion. One of the men who did participate turned Queen's witness, informing on the others in order to save his life. In all, 7 of the original 10 were granted a reprieve. 3 would not be so lucky. Pat Casey and Pat Joyce were convicted of the horrific mass murder, along with this man. And I don't want to do him the further disservice of butchering his proper Irish name, but the English version of his name is Miles Joyce. A lot of Joyces in this one, I know, but as far as I can tell, there was no direct relation between the victims and the accused. Just a ton of Joyces live in this area of the country. In fact, this area of Connemara is known as Joyce Country. The judge pronounced his sentence, and the 3 men were condemned to hang at the Galway gallows. While the other 2 men stood silent and resigned, Miles Joyce, a father of 5, vehemently protested his innocence. Miles's wife, who was heavily pregnant at the time with their 6th child, also insisted upon his innocence and begged for her husband's life. She wrote to the judge declaring that this execution of an innocent man would, quote, leave a widow and 5 orphans bereft and adrift in the world. Her pleas went unanswered. On December 15, 1882, the 3 men were led to the gallows. Miles protested his innocence with his last breath, in a language his English captors could not understand. His conviction has since been called one of the gravest miscarriages of justice in Irish history. So how are we so sure that Miles Joyce was innocent? And what about the other two men? Were they innocent as well? Prepare for your blood to boil. As I said, it was later discovered that the evidence given by the Joyce cousins was perjured. It turns out they were bribed to maintain their original testimony by none other than this man, John Spencer, 5th Earl Spencer, who was serving as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland at the time. It was a face-saving tactic, to make it look like the case hadn't been so poorly handled. Not only do we have evidence of the bribery itself, one of the cousins actually confessed years later that he had been responsible for sending an innocent man to his death. Oh, but wait, there's more. After the three men were condemned to death, Pat Casey and Pat Joyce, at the urging of their priest, actually confessed to their parts in the murders. Not only that, they both confirmed that Miles Joyce was innocent. And what did this asshole do? Just disregarded the declarations of the two guilty men. The wheels are already in motion, let's just get on with it. Sure, what's one more dead Irishman, right? There is a teensy bit of light at the end of this very dark tunnel of a story. In 2013, a pair of British MPs from the House of Lords pushed to have the case reviewed. The results of this revised investigation prompted the British Justice Minister to concede that Miles Joyce was, quote, probably an innocent man. In 2018, Irish President Michael D. Higgins granted Miles Joyce a posthumous pardon, asserting his innocence and condemning his wrongful conviction a full 136 years after his hanging. The Maamtrasna murders were awful, without question. But the case arguably exposed something even darker than murder. It exposed the horrors of colonialism itself. The larger and abiding horror is the way that English rule kept the Irish voiceless in their own land.